Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. The man who shot and killed the Lizard Lick towing TV star's son and paralyzed a woman will spend 40 years in prison. Nathan Jackson was sentenced for murder and attempted murder in that 2022 case. WRAL Brett Knese was in the courtroom today. Brett, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So take us back to 2022. Who are the victims in this case, and how did this all play out?
It happened in the beginning of 2022, and it took place at someone's home where Alex Shirley and his friend Sophie Hagy were to release balloons in a memorial for their friend who had passed away in a car crash. And it was supposed to be this nice memorial for that friend, just, another awful situation. And towards the end of the service, after people had released the balloons and things were kind of winding down, all of a sudden, dozens of shots rang out. And that's when a car with Sophie and Alex drove away to a nearby gas station. At that gas station is where police found Alex Shirley dead in the back seat and his friend Sophie with some pretty severe injuries. She was managed to survive this shooting, but she is now paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of her life. And Alex is the son of that reality TV show star Ronnie Shirley.
If I leave this courthouse and this trial with anything else, I want people to know that you have to learn to forgive no matter what, and you have to learn to love no matter how hard.
That show played out about a decade ago. And now this all has played out in court over the last almost 3 years. It all finally came to an end, at least with this first case, when Nathan Jackson faced sentencing with that judge.
Right, and we're going to get into some of the other defendants in this case in a little while, but in this particular sentencing for Jackson, what happened in court on Wednesday?
Yeah, so Jackson faced the judge, and Jackson was 16 at the time of the murder and faced sentencing for multiple different charges. He faced a first-degree murder charge, also an attempted murder charge, and several other charges, including firing a weapon into an occupied vehicle. Those charges because there was more than just those two people in the car, Alex Shirley and Sophie Hagy. So just a lot of charges. And with all of those guilty convictions, Jackson was totaled up to a 40-year prison sentence before he will be eligible for parole. The first-degree murder charge, of course, comes with a 25 to life sentence because he was 16. We'll get into this a little bit later. The 25 years is what he faces with that one, and then 15 years with all those other charges added up to 40 years before he's eligible for parole.
And the families in the courtroom for this, how did the Shirley and Hagy families react to their sentencing? What was the mood in the courtroom?
Yeah, so it's just an emotional day. Anytime you're in court, it's emotional, especially for a murder trial. And these families have been dealing with this for nearly 3 years. 34 months is what Alex Shirley's mother, Christy Lee, told me. She had it down to the day.
I felt relief. I felt a lot of relief. It's not closure. You don't get closure when you have to bury your child and see the gruesome things that we saw. It has actually decimated my world. I still say goodnight to an empty bedroom. I text his cell phone. The dogs still go in his room and look for him every day.
They did not speak today in court. Just the judge spoke. But the judge spoke for about 20, almost 30 minutes, laying out this case, the sentencing, how this all comes together, and then also referring to a lot of other previous cases to try to explain how he came to his decision for today's sentence. And with that, the Shirley family, Christy Lee, and the Hagy family, all of them tell me that they're at peace with today's decision. They understand that there's a lot of factors that go into the what played out and why it was 40 years. And we'll get into that in a few minutes. But they are at peace. They walk away with some sense of relief. It's hard to move on from burying your son.
Right. And for the Hagy family, I mean, did you get any sense of how she's been doing since this happened?
Yeah, so Sophie's mom, Jeannie, and I spoke for a few minutes.
She stays in constant pain.
And it's going to be pain that she has to deal with for the rest of her life. She goes to therapy a couple of times a week, try to rehab what she can, and it's just a tragedy. And it's and that paralysis will be a reminder, unfortunately, of just an awful, awful day for the rest of their lives.
Committing crimes in a split second is not worth it because people's lives are changed forever.
Let's take a quick break right there, and we'll be right back. Brett, before the break, you were talking about just the unimaginable consequences that these families now have to face, even if Mr. Jackson did get sentenced and some form of justice there. Why, though, did the judge give him 40 years and not a life sentence in this case?
Yeah, great question. And that all boils down to the defendant, Jackson, being 16 at the time of the crime. And so in the state of North Carolina, a juvenile cannot be handed a life sentence. There's state law and precedent that says that a juvenile does not get a life sentence because that would be cruel and unusual punishment unless the crimes rise to some rare circumstances. And so this judge, he laid out every single factor that he could think of that played into this case and really explained thoroughly why this does not rise to one of those rare circumstances where a juvenile defendant would receive a life sentence. Instead, settling on the 25 years. That's the maximum penalty under first-degree murder, and then adding on those 15 other years from the other charges. So that's why it equals that 40 years in prison before eligible for parole. And that's just eligibility. So in 40 years, depending on that parole board and depending on other circumstances, that does not mean he gets to walk away from this. There are some other things that will have to play out, but not until 40 years from now.
With all that being said, he's not the only defendant in this case. So what are the status of their cases?
Jackson had a co-defendant in the murder trial who took a plea deal, and we're not 100% certain on the sentencing on that particular co-defendant. I believe that's not going to happen for a few more weeks. And then there are two more people that are already charged, one with accessory to the murder after the fact, and then another one for obstruction of justice. And then there's a fifth person that detectives are still looking for who is involved in this case that they have not arrested at this point, but they are still trying to track down.
Wow, amazing that there's still all these moving pieces to this case with justice starting to be served, and still they're looking for someone.
Yeah, exactly right. And with this sentencing today, Jackson and his attorney did immediately appeal the case, which is pretty standard, especially in a trial like this. And the judge said no bond, and Jackson will now await the appeals process.
Well, thank you so much, Brett, and thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.